He's an internationally recognized leader in research of network security applied to applied crypto. He's from Israel, and he worked at IBM T.J. Watson Research Center. He's also was a manager of e-business and security technologies at IBM Haifa Research Lab. He's also been on the faculty at Bar Ilan University. He's got over 150 research papers and a series of patents. And I could sit here and read stuff for a while, and I'm not going to do that. I'd much rather have Dr. Herzberg come up and speak for himself. But without further ado, Dr. Herzberg.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jim. Now let's see if this works. Yeah, you hear me, right? Yeah. Do you hear me? Okay, fine. So we'll talk about a specific subject, actually very related to Chromecast, but also very related to each one of us, because it's related to how routing on the internet works. And even if you were not, of course, you are interested in security because you're here, but even if you were not, at least I think that the basic issues of this talk, the basic way of how routing works, should interest anybody. Everybody is using the internet. So let's begin without, and this is a project, what I'll present is actually kind of a combination of multiple projects that we are doing in the area. And when I say we, it's like it's kind of an ad hoc cooperation between 3 universities and a lot of people. So some of the names are over here, but I will not read of them. So let's get to the issue. And what we discussed is status, challenges, and directions for secure internet routing. And I should really say secure inter-domain internet routing, but what that means you will understand in a second. So I begin with a very brief background about internet routing. Maybe you already know this, but it will bring us to common ground. Maybe you don't, and then I hope I will bring you something new. So about internet routing and its security. The internet is a network of networks in a sense, but let's call them, for this discussion today, we call them domains. People which are working in this area may also use the terms like ISPs, if you're familiar, or autonomous systems, but for this talk, we'll just use the word domain. So there are about 50,000, even more, of these domains, which are large companies, some of them not so large, organizations, internet service providers, which connect clients. Some of them are transit providers, whose business is to connect other domains to each other and to allow transfer of traffic between different domains. So they make money out of transferring data. So here we see a very simple example of 4 domains. And you can understand that in this simplified example, Google may want to talk and communicate also with Facebook. So they will need somehow to use the transit services of AT&T and of Comcast in order to communicate. So that's a very simplified view, but really that's how the internet works, by some sort of cooperation between many different domains, okay? Now actually we don't identify these domains in the protocols by names. We identify them by numbers, obviously. That's easier for the protocols. And also the hosts we identify by numbers, by addresses, IP addresses, which probably most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with. But anyway, in current IP protocol, these are 32-bit addresses, which we normally write as 4 numbers. You probably have seen this many times. An important concept for internet routing is prefixes. Prefixes is a whole group of IP addresses which are all located in the same domain. And therefore, to route information, to route packets to all of these addresses, we should just follow the same path, the same sequence of domains to reach the domain that holds this entire prefix. So we write, oops, this is not good. We write these prefixes, are we there? No, did I move to? Okay. We write these prefixes like this. As, again, in 4 numbers with an additional number by a slash, and the slash means, for example, here's the number 16, means you should only look at the 16 top most significant bits of this field, and the rest, any value is still in the same prefix. So it's a grouping of big clusters of IP addresses, all of them in the same domain. So it's very helpful for routing to be more efficient, okay? So we can route just for the whole prefix together. And an origin is simply the domain that holds a specific prefix. So for each prefix, we have the origin, which is who is actually holding these addresses, these computers. Okay. Now, BGP is the protocol, the standard protocol for routing, for sending information, for defining the route of information between these different domains. So for messages from domain 22, I think it was Google, to reach domain 33, I think it was Facebook, they need to know that they need to go through transit provider number 1. I don't remember which one that was. Anyway, they should go through number 1. And how do we do this? So BGP is actually a simple, conceptually simple protocol. In practice, it's quite complex with a lot of details. But in concept, it's pretty simple. Each domain is sending out a message saying, I am the origin of the following prefix. And then when a transit domain gets this message, so here, domain 1, the transit domain 1 got the prefix 120016 is in domain 33, it will say, oh, if you want to get to this prefix, you can do it via me. Here is the path. So I'm a way to reach this prefix, and the route will be through me, domain 1, and then I will send to domain 33. And it could go on and on. It can get longer and longer, and they will send these messages, and that's how you can know, how to reach any particular IP address. Okay? So we will not discuss how you route within a domain. We will not discuss the security problems within a domain. We will discuss the security problems about routing between the different domains. And these are big problems because some of the domains may actually be malicious and may actually want to manipulate in some bad way the routing of messages between domains. For example, to get information they are not supposed to get. Okay. So the question of when you get such an announcement, what do you do with it? Do you actually use it to send information to that IP address, or do you use a different announcement? Do you send it to some of your customers or some of the other domains connected to you? This is what we call the BGP policy of the domain. Which route do we use? And the typical preferences, when you get multiple announcements, you will have to decide what is the best. The first preference is really written in the IP standard itself. And that says, if you have the same IP address, but you got two announcements, one for a small prefix containing this IP address and one for a larger one, you will use the announcements for the smaller, for the more specific prefix. Like you got the more precise address, so why not use the more precise address? If you have for a person, you have one address which you only got the city, and another address where you also got the street and the number, of course you will use the more specific one. Same thing. You will always prefer, if you have two addresses, you will always prefer the more specific one. That's easy. That's almost obvious. Second consideration is almost pretty obvious. Money. Money makes the world go around. Money definitely makes the internet go around. You always prefer the more economical route. So if you got an announcement from your customer, you will want to announce to everybody, hey, you can reach me via this customer because the customer is paying you for sending traffic to that customer. If you didn't get an announcement from a customer, but you got it from a peer, from somebody, from some domain with whom you have an agreement, I don't pay you, you don't pay me, that's still pretty good. If you only have it from a provider, then you have to pay that provider, but still, if you do want to announce it, you will, of course, announce that prefix, but maybe you don't. Okay. Supposing you announce, and supposing you have two announcements to select from, and both of them are both from same relationship, both are from customers, let's say. Which of them would you, and same price, okay? Which of them would you prefer? Then we go by efficiency, usually. And that is an efficiency we estimate it by the shortest route, by the smaller number of domains. It's not necessarily really more efficient, but that's kind of a rule of thumb that is often used to kind of estimate or guesstimate what may be the more efficient route. Okay, so this is a very typical policy for which route to use. And then, do we actually announce a route? We got a route. Do we actually announce it to our peers? That depends. If the route is from your customers, then surely I will announce it to everybody because, again, if somebody will use it, send through me traffic to the customer, I'm getting money, sure, I will announce it to everybody. If I got the route from non-customer and to my customers, I will also announce any route that I got. Because if I'm getting a route from a provider, I still would announce it to a customer to get money from the customer when he sends messages. But to others, for example, to a provider, I will only send an announcement if I got it from my own customer. Somebody has to pay me. That's the bottom line. Somebody has to pay me for it to make sense for me to send announcements. OK. Our focus is on security, and in particular on what we call misrouting attacks, where the traffic flows through some incorrect route, the wrong route. Often it will be to the attacker or via the attacker, or sometimes it will be to a black hole, to a domain which does not know what to do with the traffic and just drops the traffic just to make a denial of service so the traffic does not reach the destination. Here's a simple example. Suppose your domain 666 is usually the bad one, and you see also the horn, so it's a bad one. Okay? And it actually sends this incorrect announcement. So it claims to host this prefix, but it doesn't. Now, domain 22 will actually prefer that one because it is shorter. Because here it is like this claims to be the origin. So it will prefer this one, but this one is not really the origin, and it will either drop the traffic or misuse the traffic in other ways. So the attack in concept is extremely simple. And one would expect, and of course, there is awareness of this threat for about 30 years. Almost from the early days of the internet, people have been aware that this is insecure. Yet, this problem still persists to today. Still, even today, this is a very easy to launch attack, and it is being launched. Now, just so you don't think it's theoretical, here is a simple example of a real-life attack scenario. And we see here in the green, you see the normal route from Guadalajara, Mexico, to Washington, D.C. And it goes, pretty much by what you would expect, pretty geographically. You go through three transit providers, and you reach the destination. Makes sense. But then, when the attack occurred, this route hijacking attack occurred, you see suddenly this strange route was used instead. From Guadalajara, the packets went through Ashburn, and then through New York, I guess, and from there to London, and to Moscow, and to Minsk, and to Frankfurt, and then back to Washington. That doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, how could this happen? Not by any random mistake, I assure you. This was an intentional attack. Okay, so why would anybody launch such an attack? And again, this sort of attacks is very, very common. They happen all the time. Why? Why do people do this? So the most obvious motivation is eavesdropping. I just want to look at the traffic and to look at the content. And maybe I want to modify the content as well. So eavesdropping and man-in-the-middle attacks is the number one reason to do it. Another very, very common motivation is spam. Spam and phishing attacks, where attackers have to deal with the reality that there are a lot of mechanisms to detect these attacking, spamming and phishing websites. So what would the attackers do? They try, and these mechanisms usually work by identifying IP addresses which are used for spamming or for phishing attacks. What then the attacker is doing is saying, OK, I want different, new IP addresses. But how do you get them? So by just stealing them, by just doing this route hijacking and just getting hold, without paying, of additional IP addresses. Very, very common, done all the time. Done also for malware distribution. Denial of service, just to prevent traffic between two parties. That's something you can do even if the traffic is encrypted. And traffic analysis, we just heard about some of the problems with the anonymity and with networks like Tor. Tor, in particular, is completely vulnerable to this sort of traffic analysis. If you can see the traffic, then Tor cannot protect anonymity at all. Okay? So there are a lot of different motivations for doing this sort of hijacking attacks. So how do we prevent them? there are many proposals, many deployed defenses too over many years, but most of these defenses are either have not been deployed, have not been successfully deployed, are in some way impractical to deploy, and some of them are very limited in the defense they provide. So they are deployed but provide really very limited defense. So the attack has still been around for, and is still around for so many years. And there is, especially in the recent years, a lot of effort to try to finally solve this long-lasting problem. And while there is a lot of effort, a lot of companies, a lot of organizations are working on it, actually the situation is very difficult, as I will explain in a moment. So let me talk a bit about specific attacks, which are the most common kind of route hijacking attacks, and then discuss the proposed standard defense, which has been developed by many good companies, a lot of people working on it, and I'll discuss the status of this, the challenges, the big challenges, and what happens when we have partial adoption. Now, the status will be the adoption is partial. I can already tell you it will be very, very partial. And then I will talk about, well, what happens if you have partial adoption? And you will see that actually for this to be successful, we need pretty good adoption. So then we get to the question, how can we improve, which is what we are working on now. OK. So the first attack is called prefix hijacking. That is very simple. In fact, I've already shown you. It exploits the fact that we prefer a route from a customer to a route from a provider, and that we prefer a shorter route. So in this example, I will actually show the shorter route. So here's the attacker. He's trying to hijack traffic for this address. What it will do, here's the legitimate announcement for this prefix, 120016. And this is the route, just the origin 333. And here it goes. Go already? OK, here it goes. So domain 22 will send to 333. That's perfect. But what about domain 1? So domain 1 also gets this announcement. That's good. But here is the bad guy. Domain 66 is sending as if, claiming to also be the origin of the same prefix. What happens now? Now domain 1 prefers a shorter one. He's ending up sending to the attacker. So the attack succeeded. So this is a very simple attack. How can we deal with it? So the idea of this standard I'm talking about is to prevent these attacks using what we call route origin validation. That is, the domain will do some sort of validation and say, this announcement is illegal, is invalid. I'm going to drop it. The only question, of course, is how. How do we do this route origin validation? Small question, right? So how do we do it? And the idea of the standard is called RPKI, Resource Public Key Infrastructure. It's an IETF standard, so internet standard. And the idea is that we have these signed statements by the origin. And the statement says, here is the origin, and here is the prefix. And this is signed in such a way that everybody can validate and know, yes, this is a legitimate announcement, the legitimate authorization. So we call them route origin authorization, linking the prefix with the specific origin. Only this origin is allowed to announce this prefix. You may have two of these, and then only these two origins are allowed to announce this prefix. But if you have such a route origin authorization, it means if there is a BGP announcement which is not covered by a valid route origin authorization, throw it away. It's a forgery. That's what the standard says. Very simple, very effective. I will ignore now for simplicity, for time. I will ignore the signing details. If you're not familiar just with signatures and so on, even better, you just ignore this. Just assume that this thing is essentially well authenticated, OK? And if you're familiar with signatures, then this just works in the standard way. So there's nothing interesting here, so you're not missing everything. Very standard. So that part is simple. OK, let's talk about the more interesting stuff. What do we do with this stuff is route origin validation. So we can drop BGP announcements of prefixes in this block, 120016, or in any sub-block of it, where the origin AS is not 333. So it prevents prefix hijacking, false origin domain. OK. Here you see what it does. So you get this announcement, and now you can just throw it away. Very good. What about subprefix hijacking? In subprefix hijacking, the attacker will now claim to be connected to the domain, but through a subprefix. So you see it's connected by a subprefix of the legitimate prefix. And we said you always prefer the more specific, the subprefix. You will prefer it. What happens then? So to deal with that, the standard actually allows you to also look at the subprefixes, and it will define that as long as your subprefix, if you have any subprefix of the same prefix, then it should also come from the same origin. Furthermore, if you have a subprefix from the same origin, it must not be longer than a value in the standard which is called max length. The default of this max length is the same as the length of the prefix, 16. And actually, it is best if it is always 16, because if it is more than this, this will actually open us often to an attack. But let me just explain how it works. So we have now these announcements. And here's the attacker is announcing a longer subprefix. And we know that the max length is 20, so this is longer. And we just throw this away, even if it was from the right prefix, from the right origin. OK, so now we are preventing this attack. So this seems pretty simple. Announcing this route origin authorization seems pretty simple. And filtering by them is extremely simple. So problem solved. Not exactly. The real question is about adoption. Do people actually issue these route origin authorizations? And do people actually enforce this route origin validation? OK, so let's see what happens. And let's look at the route origin authorizations. And we look at the graph of BGP announcements. So this graph is of all BGP announcements, and we break them into 3 kinds. The yellow line are BGP announcements that do not have route origin authorizations. And you see over time it increases because the internet grows. And the green line are BGP announcements which do have valid route origin authorizations. And wonderful, it grows and even faster a bit than the yellow line. So we do have some progress. Only problem is the red line. The red line are, I guess another problem is that we are still at only 6.3%, so we actually would like to see this going forward. But a bigger problem is the red line. The red line is the percentage of BGP announcements which conflict with some valid ROA, route origin authorization. So these BGP announcements, they will appear to be an attack. And if we apply route origin validation, we are supposed to drop all of these BGP announcements. That could be a problem, because they are about 10% of the BGP announcement, and that has been steadily, over time, over years, that has remained about 10% of the BGP announcement with ROAs are actually with invalid ROAs, so we are conflicting with the ROAs, so we will drop them. That's a bit of a problem, or potentially. How much are actually then doing this route origin validation, considering that they will end up dropping traffic? There are no published, it's not easy to measure it. There is no direct way to measure. You cannot just do some query of the different, send something to all routers and ask them or whatever. It's not as easy. So how do you do it? So we first did a very simple crude check to see, is it really very popular? And that check looked, there are domains which are BGP collectors, where you can see all the announcements they got. They now provide this information publicly for research, for system operation, and so on. And we looked at these collectors, and we looked and said, there are so many of BGP announcements which are conflicting with ROAs. So if we got them in the collector, it means that all the domains along the route, all of these domains did not do route origin validation. So that's a way to actually identify which domains do not do route origin validation. Of course, it works only if you get an announcement in the collectors. So it only works for the biggest domains. But we were able to determine that at least 80 of the 100 largest domains do not do this route origin validation. That's pretty bad news. So the next question is, how bad are the bad news? What about the rest? I mean, is the situation really that bad? And can we measure more precisely to know? And yes, we can. And we've done measurements more precisely. I will not go into now about how we did it, but we used 3 different techniques. All of them were kind of active. We actually issued our own announcement, conflicting and non-conflicting, and so on, and ROAS, in order to check it from different places. And in short, we use these active measurements. Details I'll be happy to provide, but I guess not right now, later. And then we found that the truth is much worse. 97 of all internet domains definitely don't validate. So we have 3% that may validate, but out of them, just about 1% probably validate, and the 2.3% probably don't validate. So the situation is really very, very bad. And in fact, I forgot to write it here, but if you look at the top of the largest domains, not just largest 100, about largest 400, none of the large domains, internet domains, is doing the route origin validation. So that sounds really bad. How bad is this really? What is the impact of this technology if it is deployed partially? If we deploy it in 10% of the internet, do we get 10% reward? So maybe, okay, so we have 10% and gradually it will increase, How is the situation? So we checked that, okay? We checked what really is the security that we gain if we have partial adoption of this route origin validation. And of course, we are assuming that we are talking about a prefix which which has this route origin authorization. So it's relevant. If you don't have it, it's not even relevant. Okay, so we compare 2 scenarios. One is where the route origin validation is adopted with this probability by all the domains in the internet with this probability in the x-axis, from 0 to 1. And the green line, which has the same thing, adopted by this probability by all the internet domains, but also adopted by the top 100 largest domains. So you see, if the top 100 domains don't adopt this, then actually even if all the rest adopt it, we are still at a very high percentage of success for the attacker. So we didn't gain that much. And if like 30% of the domains adopt, then essentially you get almost nothing. Even though about 1/3 of the domains adopted, you get less than about 10%, very little. But if the 100 top domains adopt, then your situation is very good. Even when nobody else adopts it, you're not that bad. And when people begin to adopt also, you're very good. So what happens here is we have a very unusual situation here. We have an if and only if scenario. The adoption of ROV by the top largest domain is necessary and sufficient for substantial security benefits from this standard. Now, what about the reality? The active measurements that we did, only about 0.1 to 3.4 adopted. I mean, we know it's between these two, and none of them is one of the largest. So where are we really in this figure? Well, fall down here. Oh, sorry, the ball fell down, but then it disappeared. We are in this area, in this very, very bad area, where there is essentially no real value in the deployment, and if you deploy, it will not help you. We are not in a very good situation. So how do we get people to deploy this, after all? And why the partial adoption is so ineffective? So the basic reason is what we call collateral damage. That is, supposing this small domain num3 is adopting ROV, is trying to protect himself and maybe his customers, but he has a provider. The provider, the larger one, does not adopt ROV. What happens now? So we have an attacker. The attacker is trying to hijack traffic, and it will succeed. Why? Because here's the legitimate announcement to 110016. Here is the illegitimate one to 111024, a sub-prefix attack. Very effective, as usual. What happens is domain 2 is not adopting, so he's sending both of them. Domain 3 is adopting, so he's going to throw the bad one. But does it help us? Where does it send the traffic? Sending it still to domain 2. What is domain 2 doing with the traffic? Still sending to the attacker because it is not applying ROV. So the fact that domain 3 has adopted does not help. Okay, this is what we call collateral damage. So that was the collateral damage. And okay, so what can we do about this very problematic situation where adoption is so limited, and yet we see that if adoption will not be really significant, we don't get advantage. So we really must move adoption forward. Okay, how do we do it? So the basic problem about people adopting route origin validation, one problem is that it currently does not bring you a lot of security benefits. But the other problem about adoption of route origin validation is that people are concerned about losing traffic because of these many conflicts between BGP announcements, legitimate BGP announcements, and ROAs. So people are concerned, maybe I will lose a lot of traffic, especially big transit providers who are making their money out of transit of traffic. So why should I, as a transit provider, use this, deploy ROV, if the result will be I'm losing traffic? Where am I getting value out of this, right? We said it's all about money. So our goal is try to motivate and facilitate route origin validation in a way which will be safe, easy, and safe for the providers, okay? In particular, keeping the very well-known principle, do no harm, don't lose traffic, okay? And for that, we are implementing what we call what-if scenarios, which visualize to the operator, if you would have invoked route origin validation with the following options, and I'll talk about the options in a moment because we also had some options to minimize the damage. But if you would have invoked it and you select in which mode and in which parameters, if you would have done it a month ago, this is how much traffic, apparently legitimate traffic you would have lost, and this is how many attacks or much attack traffic you would have prevented. So this gives to the operator some idea, which hopefully, because we've also tried to have modes which will be kind of safe, hopefully will allow the operator to see, oh, I'm actually not losing any traffic or almost no traffic, and yes, I'm actually getting some security benefits, and therefore encourage the operators to gradually actually move the system into active mode where it would actually block traffic. Now, what are these policies that we also added to the system? These are what I would call minimize loss modes. So these are modes whose goal is to minimize the amount of damage, of loss of traffic that you will have. So they kind of resolve these conflict situations between ROAs and between legitimate BGP announcements. So we can either ignore completely such a ROA which conflicts with BGP announcements, or we can whitelist the conflicting but good BGP announcements, so we allow it although it conflicts with the ROA. And of course, the small question is, how do we define that the BGP announcement is indeed good? But as I will explain in a moment, we actually have a very good heuristic for that, which works really pretty well. I'll show in a second. Okay, so what we are doing now is finishing this project, testing it. It's on GitHub, it's an open source free project. And we are working on experiments which are planned once we believe the system is stable enough. There are several operators really interested in deploying it. So when we feel it's stable enough, we'll begin doing them. LinkedIn, some in South America, several operators. The phase 2 of the project will be doing further improvements. One of them is what we call ROV++, which is extending this ROV. I will not get into the details, but extending it, providing even better security benefits, and also providing some deployment for people to, incentive for people to deploy the system. So some financial, you will actually be able to get more traffic by deploying the system and not just not lose traffic. And the other part is what we call path-end validation. That's something we presented already last SIGCOM, which extends with very minimal extra effort. Really, there's almost nothing additional that the operators needs to do, and you get protection from even more attacks. I will not get into the details, but it does provide better defense. What I will explain is what is the simple heuristic we use for determining what was an announcement, a BGP announcement we should block or not, and that's simply time-based. We use the fact that most of these hijacks are pretty short-lived because any normal network operators will see, oh, there is this hijack, so we will need to block it. So these hijacks are very, very short-lived, usually less than 2 weeks, and that's actually even talking about the less severe hijacks. I'll not get into this. So if we just allow the operator to say, okay, if you have an announcement which has been out there for 2-3 weeks, let it live, that will actually get rid of almost all of the false positives. Okay. So that's the idea. I will skip we have another research which is doing something beyond BGP, fixing BGP, because BGP is limited. It's not really dealing with things like denial of service attacks. So we have a mechanism we call SAFE for handling that, but with all the time we lost, we'll have to skip all that. So if you're interested, ask me or go to my site, read the papers, and so on. So that's about SAFE. And I'll conclude that the routing security is really a fun and very important research area, practical area too. Deployment is a huge challenge. In general, in internet security standards, deployment is a huge challenge. The ROAS, the progress is very slow, but worse, we have these many, many conflicts. That's a real problem. With the out-origin validation, situation is much worse, and mainly because of the fear of losing traffic. BGP-SEC, I did not talk about it, but it's another standardization effort. But that I did not have time also to present it or the result, but essentially it appears very unlikely. I wouldn't like to say dead on arrival, but I'm not saying it mainly because I have a lot of friends working on this stuff, so I don't want to annoy them. But realistically, everybody understands it is. It's essentially, this will never happen. The smart validator should really help deployment with the what-if scenario, with the safe deployment mode, do no harm. With the improvements like pass-end security, it should help. There is a lot of work to do on routing security beyond BGP, like the stuff I did not have time to talk with you about. But let's first, deal with BGP because that's what we have right now. Okay, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them if I'm allowed. Thank you.
So maybe we have time for a quick question or two. Mark.
Thanks for the presentation. I have a quick question. Can you also use overlay networks to build certain guarantees that may help you with your battle to...
Are you referring now to the beyond BGP part? Yeah, we definitely would use overlay networks to achieve these beyond BGP properties, definitely. Yeah. But I did not talk about them. But yes, they do involve overlay networks, yes. Yeah.
So I'm Jean Camp from Indiana.
Somebody asked, but I don't see the person. Oh,
I'm over here, yeah.
Oh, that's...
My name is Jean Camp. I'm from Indiana University. We did to echo our first opening speakers, we did a similar work, but we included a macroeconomic analysis and found that, and some clustering, and found that if you use time series, it is the case that you miss the nation state attacks, that if you want to, look at the Bitcoin attacks and the spammers, using time series analyses works. But like the Denver to Denver hijack that went through Ukraine, the advanced persistent threat, those have very different temporal and graph theoretical features. So I want to bring our first speaker's points in and say that when you look at the features of anomalies and you look at their patterns, you can't negate the socio-political context, and you can get information about where an AS is from CADA and look at our numbers if you like. So there's critical components that have to be included when you do this numerical analysis.
Okay, thank you. So we can discuss it later, I guess. Okay, I'll be happy to. Okay, so...
Okay, so let's thank Amir one more time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.